I am. This year, the election isn't going to be a popularity contest.
They were the faces of innocence, joy, and perfect family harmony, but fame has a way of hiding its deepest fractures. As millions of fans celebrated the Partridge family, one star was quietly breaking away, not out of pride, but out of pain. Many fans are shocked that Susan Day refused the Partridge family reunion because of this co-star. Guess who and why? America's sweetheart. In 1970, American television experienced a seismic shift when Susan Day, then just a 17-year-old former model, landed the role of Laurie Partridge in the hit show The Partridge Family. At the time, Day was largely unknown in the acting world with only limited experience, but her striking beauty and innate screen presence catapulted her into the spotlight, making her an overnight sensation. She embodied the role of Laurie with an effortless charm, drawing audiences to their TV screens week after week. Her fresh-faced innocence and graceful demeanor resonated with viewers, quickly earning her the title of America's sweetheart. Teenage girls admired her for her youthful energy and pure appeal, while parents appreciated her wholesome portrayal as Laurie, the idealized daughter in a musical family. The Partridge Family, which revolved around a traveling musical family navigating the ups and downs of show business in a brightly colored bus, became a cultural sensation almost immediately. Merchandise bearing the show's logo and Day's face flew off the shelves, and the show's songs became chart-topping hits. The success was almost overwhelming, with every episode drawing massive audiences. They became a household name virtually overnight, her image plastered on magazine covers, posters, and in the hearts of millions of fans. Yet, while the world celebrated her as an innocent, doe-eyed television star, the reality was far more complex. Day's rapid rise to fame was not the fairy tale it seemed. Beneath the public adoration, a quieter, more fragile story was unfolding behind the scenes, one filled with the personal struggles of growing up under the microscope of fame. As her fame ballooned, so did the expectations placed upon her, both by the public and her own internal pressures. The charming Laurie Partridge, as depicted on screen, was just a facade, and the reality behind the bright lights and public persona was a far cry from the image of innocence the world adored. What audiences never saw, while the Partridge family was full of laughter, family harmonies, and idyllic scenes of life on the road in their iconic bus, was that the show's off-screen reality was much more complicated. The set was an arena where youthful ambition, personal struggles, and unspoken tensions simmered just below the surface. Fame, for all its glitter, was an immense burden for teenagers who were suddenly thrust into the limelight, their every move scrutinized by a ravenous media and adoring fans. Despite tabloid whispers and rumors, David Cassidy, the show's breakout star and Day's co-star, later went on record insisting that there were no major feuds among the cast. In fact, he claimed that the cast was very much like a family. He emphasized his close relationships with his co-stars, particularly Shirley Jones, who played his mother on the show, Danny Bonaduce, who portrayed his mischievous brother, and Susan Day, who was not only his TV sister, but also a confidant. However, no amount of affection could erase the complexities of growing up in the public eye. Beneath the bright lights of the show's success, the cast members, particularly Day, were grappling with the same teenage emotions that any young person would experience: hormones, unspoken attractions, and a sense of isolation in the face of overwhelming fame. Day herself later revealed that despite their close relationships, the intensity of the show's success sometimes made it difficult to maintain genuine connections with her co-stars. The pressures of fame combined with the growing personal differences between the cast slowly began to create rifts that would only deepen as time went on. One such complication was Day's strained relationship with David Cassidy. While on-screen they portrayed the perfect siblings, off-screen the tension between the two was palpable. Both were rising stars, each with their own burgeoning fan base. But as Day's star continued to rise, Cassidy's fame became a double-edged sword. The adoration from fans grew more intense, and with it came the inevitable comparisons. Both actors had to navigate the delicate balance between their public personas and their personal lives, a challenge that led to more than a few uncomfortable moments behind the scenes. Day's quiet, introspective nature contrasted sharply with Cassidy's more extroverted personality, and their differences started to show as Day became more disillusioned with the public's expectations of her and the pressure to constantly be Laurie Partridge. The cracks in their seemingly perfect relationship grew wider. There were private moments of frustration and unspoken tensions that simmered beneath the surface of their on-screen chemistry. These tensions were never made public at the time, but they would eventually resurface as the years went by, as the cast members dealt with the fallout of their time on the Partridge Family. Despite this, Dave's legacy as Laurie Partridge endured. The show's success brought her fame and recognition, but it also came with a heavy price. The real Susan Day, the young woman trying to navigate the complexities of fame, family, and self-identity, was often lost in the role that the world had come to expect of her. Susan and David's complicated bond. As the years passed and the Partridge Family settled into its iconic spot in American television history, deepened in ways that even she couldn't fully comprehend at the time. It wasn't just a fleeting crush, not the type that fans might have imagined. No, Susan's feelings were complex, intense, and tangled with the unique pressures of growing up in the spotlight. While David Cassidy basked in the attention of millions, effortlessly embodying the role of heartthrob, Susan found herself standing just a little bit closer to him, sharing moments between takes, private jokes, and an emotional connection that extended far beyond the screen. She had watched David evolve from a teen idol to the star that everyone adored, but it was David's own magnetism that kept her tethered even as she tried to keep her emotions at bay. But David, already keenly aware of his status as a teen sensation, often kept her at arm's length. The very nature of their show, where innocence was paramount and any hint of romance was discouraged, made it difficult for either of them to explore the deeper emotions that simmered beneath the surface. David, as charming and self-assured as he appeared to the world, was also wary of entangling himself with anyone, especially Susan, who was not only his co-star, but also a fellow teenager with her own vulnerabilities. Susan's feelings, however, were impossible to ignore. They bloomed quietly, growing as she saw David both as a friend and as someone she admired in ways that went beyond the chemistry they shared on screen. In the midst of the show's success, with its whirlwind tours and the constant demand for the image of a perfect family, Susan's private heartache remained unspoken, hidden away beneath the layers of her growing fame. David, despite his playful and sometimes flirtatious behavior with her, never crossed that threshold into anything romantic. As he later admitted, he found it easier to maintain distance, conscious of how their relationship might complicate the public image the show was trying so desperately to preserve. For Susan, the emotional distance was both a source of pain and confusion, one that she couldn't fully articulate even as it grew heavier in her heart. The rejection was never overt, but it existed in the silence that surrounded their interactions over the years. Susan Day's feelings for David will remain locked away, unspoken, unresolved, and swallowed down amid the overwhelming roar of fame and the expectations placed on both of them. It was a quiet wound that, at the time, she didn't know how to address. She channeled her heartbreak into her performances, crafting a public persona that was as poised and composed as she could muster, while internally she navigated the complexities of unrequited love. Her relationship with David Cassidy, though never fully realized, would come to define much of her early adult life, a bond that was full of longing but never fully returned. And in the years that followed, as she sought to distance herself from the show and the pressure of being forever linked to Laurie Partridge, Susan would bury the feelings she once had for David beneath the surface, but deep down that secret heartache would never fully fade. The revelation that changed everything. As the years moved on and the Partridge Family became a relic of nostalgic television, the actors who had once embodied those characters began to seek out new paths in life. For Susan Day, this meant carving out a respected career in television and film far away from the shadows of Laurie Partridge. She became known for her roles in more serious, mature productions far removed from the frothy, light-hearted sitcom that had made her famous. For David Cassidy, however, the past remained a prominent fixture in his life. Despite his efforts to move beyond it, his career continued to revolve around the legacy of his teen idol status, even as he struggled with personal demons. In 2007, Cassidy decided to lay his own version of the past bare in his autobiography, Could It Be Forever? Within the pages of the book, Cassidy recounted his experiences from the height of his fame, detailing his relationships with co-stars, fans, and the inner turmoil that often came with being a heartthrob. But among the many revelations tucked within the chapters, one moment stood out, a confession that sent shockwaves through both his readers and the very people involved in the story. Cassidy revealed that, in the midst of their years together on the Partridge Family, he and Susan Day had once spent the night together. The night was described in vague terms, a brief moment in time that seemed to haunt him as much as it had shaped their relationship. Yet for Susan, the revelation was not merely a passing moment in a book. It was a betrayal, a breach of trust that would forever alter the course of their relationship. Susan, who had spent decades distancing herself from her Partridge Family persona and the emotional scars of her youth, was blindsided by Cassidy's words. In the years since the show's cancellation, she had built a life for herself, one that didn't revolve around the public's idea of who she was. She had moved on from her time as Lori Partridge and the quiet pain of her unreciprocated feeling for David, but now this private, vulnerable moment of her youth, one that had never been shared with the world, was suddenly thrust into the spotlight without her consent. Cassidy's confession came not as a private apology, not as a way to mend the broken bridge between them, but as a salacious tidbit nestled between tales of fame and fortune. It was an act of revelation for the sake of fame itself, a momentary piece of nostalgia stripped of the context and emotion that had defined it. For Susan, this was not just a breach of privacy. It was a painful violation of a chapter of her life she had hoped to keep buried forever. Her silence in the years that followed spoke volumes. She didn't publicly respond to Cassidy's words, nor did she seek to correct a narrative that had now been established. But her refusal to acknowledge him, her absence from any reunion shows or interviews, made it clear she could never return to a friendship with David Cassidy after this. The wound that had once been buried deep within her had now been exposed for the world to see, and it could never be healed. The line that had been crossed between them could never be undone, and Susan Day's silence was the loudest response she could give. Building a new life after the show ended in 1974, Susan found herself standing at a crossroads. While the world continued to see her as Lori Partridge, she was determined to be more than just a one-dimensional TV star. She sought to distance herself from the trap of typecasting, hoping to carve out a new path where she could be recognized for her talent, not her past. She soon found that path with the role of Grace Van Owen on L.A. Law, a groundbreaking legal drama that premiered in the mid-1980s. As a seasoned, accomplished attorney, Grace was a stark departure from the naive, tuneful Lori. Susan's portrayal of Grace earned her critical acclaim and several prestigious awards, including a Golden Globe, marking a significant turning point in her career. She was no longer just a nostalgic figure from a bygone era. She was a respected actress celebrated for her nuanced performances and her ability to step into complex, multidimensional roles. In the 1990s, when the Partridge Family nostalgia was at an all-time high, spurred on by the rise of TV specials and reunion hopes, Susan's absence became even more conspicuous. VH1 clamored for a reunion special, and ABC floated the idea of a one-off comeback episode. Fans of the show rallied on message boards and in fan clubs, relentlessly petitioning for one more glimpse of the beloved family they had grown up with. It seemed like a perfect moment for a reunion. The original cast was available, the audience was eager, and the nostalgia for the show was at its peak. One by one, the original cast members expressed varying degrees of interest in participating, but Susan Day remained silent. No interviews, no statements, no public reflections. In the world of celebrity reunions, where many stars jump at the opportunity to cash in on nostalgia, Susan's refusal to engage stood out. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the eager voices of her former co-stars. For Susan, the Partridge Family was not merely a sitcom. It was a time that shaped her for better or worse. The silence that followed her decision was her way of reclaiming power over a narrative that had for too long been dictated by others. It wasn't just about avoiding a reunion for the sake of nostalgia. It was about preserving her dignity, her privacy, and her peace of mind. The real reason for the refusal, the untold story behind Susan Day's refusal to participate in any Partridge Family reunion, was far more complex and deeply rooted than anyone initially believed. Insiders close to production had long whispered about the real reason for her absence, and it had everything to do with one person, David Cassidy. While many attribute her silence to general disinterest or personal choice, those who knew Susan well understood that her decision was a direct result of the betrayal she felt at Cassidy's hands. The wound had festered over time, deepening with every passing year. It was not just a matter of old hurt feelings or faded memories from their youthful days on set. The betrayal went far beyond the boundaries of a mere romantic misunderstanding. It was personal. It was a violation of trust, an irreparable fracture in the fragile relationship they once shared. One former associate, speaking under condition of anonymity, captured the raw sentiment with brutal honesty. He's an evil piece of... The words rang with a mix of anger, disappointment, and unresolved pain that still lingered in the air years after the Partridge family had wrapped its final episode. But it wasn't the pain of a failed romance that had created this chasm. It wasn't the type of hurt one might expect from an unrequited love or a childhood crush that had turned sour with age. No, the anger stemmed from something much deeper. It was about trust. It was about privacy. It was about the line that had been crossed between them, a line that was sacred and one that Cassidy had unapologetically paraded for the entire world to see. The publication of David Cassidy's autobiography had shattered Susan Day's world in ways that no one could have anticipated. In those pages, Cassidy had casually mentioned a night they had spent together, a night that his eyes seemed to hold no weight. But for Susan, it was a betrayal that exposed her to the world in a way that she could never undo. The very personal moment once shared between them in secrecy was now public property, laid bare for the amusement and curiosity of fans. The vulnerability she had entrusted him would have been exploited, and David did not apologize for the pain he had caused. The act of betrayal wasn't the physical encounter itself, but the way it was trivialized and turned into fodder for his narrative. For Susan, participating in any reunion would have been an act of hypocrisy. It would have been a betrayal of her own integrity to stand beside the very man who had humiliated her in the most public way possible. To pretend that everything was fine, to pretend that the broken trust hadn't shattered everything between them, would have been to dishonor the truth of what had transpired. And so Susan Day chose silence. She chose absence. She chose integrity over the false pretense of reunion. The road was harder, much harder, but in the end she maintained her dignity. She had no desire to relive the past for anyone's sake, especially not for the sake of the man who had irreparably damaged their bond. A final goodbye. When David Cassidy passed away on November 21st, 2017, the world was plunged into a wave of nostalgia and grief. For millions, he was forever the charming teen idol from the Partridge family, the heartthrob who had captured the hearts of teenagers and parents alike. Fans across the globe turned to social media to express their sorrow, flooding timelines with tributes, photos, and heartfelt messages. He was remembered not just for his fame, but for the joy he had brought into the homes of his admirers. But amidst the collective mourning, one notable silence stood out. Susan Day, the actress who had once shared the screen with Cassidy playing his sister Lori Partridge in the beloved sitcom, offered no public words of tribute, no tear-filled interview, no acknowledgement of the loss. Her silence was deafening. There was no grand gesture of mourning or reflection from her. It wasn't oversight, nor was it the result of any unresolved animosity. It was a deliberate choice, a final act of self-preservation. Susan had long avoided revisiting the past, a past that for all its glitter had been marred by personal betrayals and private heartbreak, and so she chose to grieve in her own way, in her own time, far removed from the cameras and the public gaze. While others rallied together to celebrate David's life, Susan Day retreated into a quiet space, preserving the boundary she fought so hard to maintain, the boundary that David Cassidy himself had once crossed, unknowingly or perhaps carelessly, in ways that still haunted her. A reunion that never was. As the years passed, the dream of a Partridge family reunion lived on in the hearts of fans. There were speculations, rumors, and even official attempts to bring the beloved cast back together. Specials were made, documentaries were produced. Fans clamored for a reunion, for the shining moment where the Partridge family would once again stand together, smiling in perfect harmony just as they had in the 1970s. But as time marched on, that reunion remained elusive, though the world saw glimpses of the Partridge family cast through television specials and anniversary celebrations. The one reunion that everyone hoped for, the kind where all the surviving members stood shoulder to shoulder, basking in the collective love of their audience, never came to pass. Among the missing faces in these events was Susan Day's. She chose not to participate. standing resolutely apart from the nostalgic waves that had swept through her former co-stars. There were those who speculated about her absence, questioning why she had chosen to remain away when so many others had embraced the moment. But for Susan, the answer was clear. She had never been interested in living in the past, not when the past had so often been a place of pain. For Susan, the Partridge Family was a chapter she had long since closed. The show's legacy, its fandom, and the reunion projects only served as reminders of a time that had never fully healed for her, a time when her own personal suffering was glossed over for the sake of entertainment. Her decision to remain absent wasn't an attempt to distance herself from the love her fans had shown her. It was a quiet statement. Some things, some wounds, are not meant to be revisited. They are better left exactly where they ended, behind closed doors and tucked away in the quiet corners of the past. The message was a subtle one but powerful. Not all reunions are meant to happen. Some stories are better left untold, some memories too painful to revisit. Susan Day's refusal to return to the spotlight was not a denial of the past, but an affirmation of the importance of personal peace. She had built a life far from the echoes of her former fame, a life where she was in control of her own narrative. In a world obsessed with the past, with nostalgia, and with the idea of perfect reunions, Susan Day taught us that some things are better left behind, that sometimes the greatest lesson we can learn is to leave the past where it belongs, in the past. Have you ever been betrayed by someone revealing one of your secrets? How would you have felt if this went public on such a huge scale? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.